Get all white out of your head. This year, the most beautiful kitchens are using palettes that no one would have dared to try 5 years ago. And the surprising thing is, many of these palettes do not cost any extra money. They are just configured differently. You'd be awesome if you liked this video. 1. White and oak. A kitchen I saw recently used materials that were not cheap at all, but it looked cold and sterile. The homeowner only swapped the upper cabinets to natural oak, keeping the white lower cabinets. No layout changes, no countertop replacements, no major renovations. Yet the kitchen warmed up instantly and looked as if it had been redesigned from scratch just because of that change. White and oak is a color combination that has almost never truly disappeared from the most beautiful kitchens. White brings a bright, clean, and spacious feel, while oak adds the warmth to keep the space from feeling cold or empty. These two elements balance each other very naturally, and that is why this palette works well with almost every style from Scandinavian to transitional without being tied to any specific trend. But there is one detail that many people choose incorrectly, which lies in the shade of white. Brilliant white paired with oak usually gives off a showroom or clinic vibe rather than a place for everyday living. Warm white or off-white with a subtle cream undertone is much more pleasing because it does not reflect light too harshly when placed next to natural wood grain. The simplest trick is to place the paint swatch right next to the wood sample under the actual light in the kitchen and leave it there for a few days, because many whites look fine in the store but reveal a very noticeable blue or purple undertone next to oak at home that you did not realize in the showroom. In terms of cost, this is also a budget-friendly palette. Oak cabinetry is typically about 20 to 30% cheaper than walnut, and red oak is significantly less expensive than white oak. If stained to the right color, red oak provides very beautiful wood grain without having to pay the premium price of white oak. For someone thinking about resale, this is the safest palette because it does not polarize buyers. Almost anyone walking into a white and oak kitchen feels comfortable and can easily envision the space to their liking without needing to make any additional changes. The next palette is equally familiar, but the boundary between timeless and dated lies in a very small decision that many people choose incorrectly. 2. Blue and white. I once saw a kitchen using royal blue cabinets that looked very impressive when it was first finished. 2 years later, the homeowner wanted to repaint because it started to look more like a coastal concept than a kitchen for everyday living. The issue is not that blue and white is an old color combination because, in fact, it remains very classic. The issue is that whichever shade of blue you choose will determine whether the kitchen looks timeless or dated in just a few years. Bright blue or royal blue usually dates very quickly because they are too strong and tied to a specific trend. However, dusty blue, blue-gray, or soft navy last much longer because they are more neutral and do not scream in the space. When paired with warm white instead of stark white, the overall kitchen is softer and layered instead of looking like a coastal concept. This is also where the most common mistake occurs. Just by adding too many coastal-themed decor items, seashells, stripes, and too many glossy white surfaces, the kitchen will look thematic instead of elegant. The most beautiful blue and white kitchens are usually very restrained in decor and let the colors speak for themselves instead of emphasizing them further with accessories. Blue and white works very well for two-tone cabinetry. Blue on the lower cabinets and white on the uppers keeps the top section light and bright and the bottom section deep, and the overall kitchen looks taller because the eye is pulled upward by the light color above. Hardware also influences things more than you think. Brass or aged bronze adds warmth very effectively, while stainless steel sometimes makes the overall look a bit cold and too technical. If you are debating which shade of blue to pick, take the swatch and place it next to the countertop and flooring under the actual light in the kitchen. If it still feels pleasing after a few days, that is usually the right shade of blue. 3. Tonal neutrals. I once saw 2 kitchens with the same square footage and the same layout. The first one used white cabinets, a gray countertop, and stainless steel appliances. It looked clean but cold and a bit boring. The second one used beige cabinets, a limestone countertop, and warm oak flooring. It was also entirely neutral, but stepping inside it felt completely different because everything was warmer, softer, and had significantly more depth. A tonal neutral kitchen is a color scheme that has no obvious main color. Instead, there is a very subtle transition between beige, warm gray, taupe, and off-white. At first glance, it seems simple, but that exact restraint creates an understated, expensive feel that many bolder color schemes struggle to achieve. These colors also do not cause eye fatigue, do not chase trends, and rarely make the homeowner bored after a few years. However, neutral kitchens have a trap. When the cabinetry, walls, floors, and countertops almost blend into one another without any variation, the kitchen will look flat and lifeless. This is where texture becomes almost as important as color. Matte cabinetry paired with a slightly raw stone countertop Natural wood grain or a subtly textured plaster wall will create layers that the eye can perceive, even though the overall color palette remains very light. A limestone countertop placed next to matte cabinets looks completely different from smooth quartz next to glossy cabinets, even within the same color palette. This is a small detail, but it differentiates a normal-looking kitchen from a designer-grade kitchen. This color tone is also the safest for resale because it does not polarize buyers. Anyone walking in feels comfortable and can easily envision the space to their liking. If you like neutrals but want the kitchen to feel closer to nature rather than a showroom, the next palette moves in that direction. 4. Light brown and stone beige. Light brown and stone beige are tones that you feel before you see them. Stepping into a kitchen using this palette, the first feeling is usually warmth and comfort, even if you cannot point out exactly why. It is close to the earth, close to wood, close to the feeling of a real lived-in home rather than a space styled for photos. Light brown and stone beige create a very different type of warmth compared to gray or taupe. A light brown wood floor, a limestone-colored countertop, and sand-toned cabinetry barely compete with each other for attention. They coordinate to create a quiet background where you feel comfortable the moment you walk in without needing to understand exactly why. Especially under natural light, all of these surfaces shift shades very subtly throughout the day. Airy and fresh in the morning, warm and relaxing in the afternoon without needing to change any lighting. This combination looks best when using real materials. Real stone countertops instead of quartz mimicking stone, real wood instead of laminate mimicking wood. Because the color tones are so close to nature, the eye easily spots when materials are not real, and at that point the kitchen will look cheap instead of earthy. Unlike tonal neutrals, which can still look good with manufactured materials, this palette almost demands natural materials to function properly. A very practical advantage is that light brown and stone beige are significantly more forgiving regarding everyday dust and dirt. You do not see dust as clearly as on dark wood, nor do you see stains exposed as on white surfaces. For busy families who do not have time to wipe down the kitchen every day, this is a palette where the kitchen still looks clean, even if you wait a few days to clean. 5. Sage green and cream. If deep green with walnut, which we will talk about later, is a luxury mood, then sage green with cream is a much lighter version, meant for anyone who wants color in the kitchen but does not want it to be too dramatic. Sage is not just deep green dialed back a bit. It is a completely different tone, closer to gray-green, and the feeling it creates is also entirely different. Light, relaxing, and closer to a spa mood than a library mood. What surprises many people is that this palette is not weak or too soft at all when the right details are added. A slightly dark soapstone countertop, walnut stools, or brass hardware with an aged finish all push the overall look to be much more mature without destroying the inherent softness. It is precisely those small layers of contrast that keep the kitchen from becoming monotonous, even though the color palette seems very simple at first glance. The cream used here cannot just be any cream either. A cream that is too yellow will push sage green into a strange tone, and the overall look will begin to look retro in an undesirable way, somewhat like a 70s kitchen instead of a modern kitchen. Ivory or warm linen tones usually work much better because they are just warm enough without pulling the palette in a dated direction. Glossy cabinetry or lighting that is too white can also easily kill the softness, which is the greatest strength of sage and cream. So matte finishes and warm lighting are almost mandatory requirements if you want this color tone to function properly. What I like most about this palette is that you do not need a remodel at all to try it. Paint the cabinetry sage green and the walls cream, and switch to new brass handles. The total cost might only be a few $100s, yet the feel of the kitchen changes noticeably on the very first day. And if you want to change it after a while, repainting does not cost much either. In this entire video, this is probably the most wallet-friendly palette that still creates the feeling of a well-designed kitchen. Sage green has just enough color so the kitchen is not bland. But if you want to go even more earthy, the next combination will show you why the moment you see it under the afternoon sunlight. 6. Terracotta and sand beige. I saw a kitchen using terracotta floor tiles, sand beige cabinets, and a limestone countertop. There was nothing particularly expensive, but in the late afternoon with the sunlight streaming through the window, the entire kitchen came alive in a way that modern white kitchens rarely can create. It is the type of space that makes people want to sit down and have coffee instead of leaving right after cooking. Terracotta carries a very distinct kind of warmth. Not cold like gray, not sleek like white, but close to the earth, close to raw materials, and gives the kitchen a much clearer emotional feel. Sand beige paired with it makes the overall look lighter, and easier on the eyes while still maintaining warmth throughout, without feeling heavy like when terracotta is paired with dark tones. The biggest trap of this palette is overusing terracotta. A red shade that is too strong or an undertone that is too hot will make the kitchen look thematic, resembling a Mediterranean restaurant concept more than a living space. Muted terracotta or dusty terracotta works much better because it is still warm but soft enough to coexist next to neutral tones without overpowering them. That is the boundary between a kitchen that maintains long-lasting beauty and a kitchen that looks like a short-term Instagram trend. Terracotta does not necessarily have to be a major decision either. Floor tiles create the strongest and most durable feel over time. Backsplash tiles serve as a focal point without being too overwhelming for a small space. And if you want to try it before committing, painting an accent wall or switching the bar stools to a terracotta color is enough to test this tone with the actual light in your kitchen and see if you truly like living with it every day. Note that real terracotta tiles are a porous material, meaning grease and water can soak in if not sealed thoroughly, especially on the kitchen floor or a backsplash near the cooking area. If you like the terracotta color but do not want to bother with periodic sealing, porcelain tiles mimicking terracotta now look very much like the real thing while being completely maintenance-free. And that is the choice many people pick to get that earthy feel without having to worry about maintenance. 7. Deep green and walnut. If you want a kitchen that feels luxurious without being cold and rich in depth without being flashy, this is the combination that many designers return to time, and again despite constantly changing trends. Deep green, forest green, or hunter green paired with walnut creates a very distinct mood, mature and full of character and looking more expensive than the actual cost spent. Green brings an organic feel, walnut adds richness, and these two colors complement each other so naturally that a third color is almost unnecessary. Especially with greens that are slightly muted or olive-toned, the walnut wood grain stands out more and creates a layered feel that a monochromatic palette struggles to achieve. Forest green, hunter green, or deep emerald all work well here, but stay away from lime or Kelly green because they will pull the overall look in a completely different direction. The trap of this palette lies in how easily it can be pushed into being heavy. Dark green cabinets, walnut flooring, and a dark countertop, combined with a lack of natural light, will cause the kitchen to transition from cozy to suffocating very quickly, which you might not realize until living with it for a few weeks. The most beautiful kitchens with this palette always have a clear visual break. Lighter countertops, light walls, or windows large enough to break up the heavy feel of the two dominant tones. Antique brass or bronze hardware is also almost mandatory because stainless steel destroys the warmth of the entire palette instantly. In terms of practical use, walnut is softer than oak, so it dents and scratches more easily, especially if used for an island top or countertop. You will have to choose between periodic sealing to maintain the surface or accepting a patina over time, and many people actually prefer that aged look because it fits the overall mood of the palette. Regarding resale, you need to know in advance that green and walnut make a very strong impression when staged properly, but because the mood is so distinct, it polarizes buyers significantly more than white and oak. If you plan to stay long-term, this is an excellent palette, but if you plan to sell the house within the next few years, it is worth reconsidering. 8. Burgundy and smoky cream travertine. 2 years ago, if anyone mentioned red in the kitchen, the first reaction would usually be Italian restaurant or retro 1990s. That reaction makes sense because bright red in a kitchen does look cheap. But a muted burgundy is completely different. When mixed with a brown or gray undertone to dial down the vibrancy, this deep red shade brings a very unique kind of luxury that green or navy cannot create, closer to the feeling of sipping wine in the evening than brewing coffee in the morning. Smoky cream travertine is the perfect counterweight to the intensity of burgundy. The natural stone surface with its tiny pores and smooth veining inherently possesses a softness and irregularity that manufactured materials cannot create. So when placed next to the deep red shade, it softens the overall look very naturally without needing any intermediate color. However, this is also the easiest palette to ruin if the proportions are wrong. Covering all the cabinetry in burgundy and then using a polished travertine surface is the fastest way to turn the kitchen into a cocktail bar instead of a living space. Dark glossy surfaces also reveal fingerprints very clearly, so they look dirty faster than you think. Keeping a 30-70 proportion will be much safer. Burgundy for the lower cabinets or a pantry cabinet cluster as an accent, leaving the rest to light plaster walls or a honed travertine that maintains its natural matte look. Oil-rubbed bronze or matte black aluminum is the best hardware for this tone because it maintains the deep tone throughout, without creating a glaring bright spot among surfaces that are already very soft. Polished stainless steel will break the mood instantly. This is a palette for someone who knows what they want and is not afraid to be different. But the boundary between beautiful and overdone is thinner than any other palette in this video. So test swatches first and live with it for a few weeks before committing. All the previous palettes need light to look beautiful. This final palette is the only one that looks its best when you turn off some lights. 9. Dark tones and metallic accents. There are kitchens that feel instantly different the moment you walk in. It is not about being brightly lit, nor is it about being immensely spacious. Rather, it's a type of deep and luxurious mood that you find difficult to explain precisely but can feel very clearly. Deep charcoal, ink blue, or dark green makes the cabinetry look heavy and full of strong character. And then the metallic accents from brass, aged bronze, or brushed gold catch just enough light to make the entire space come alive instead of sinking into darkness. The biggest mistake with a dark kitchen is trying to make it too sleek. Glossy black surfaces sound luxurious, but in reality they usually make the kitchen cold and empty. Matte finishes or materials with a slight raw texture look much more beautiful because light does not reflect harshly, but instead spreads softly across the surface, creating a warmer and more authentic feel. Deep charcoal cabinets with a white marble countertop or light oak flooring are the way to maintain the dark mood without the kitchen being completely swallowed up. Natural light pretty much determines the success or failure of this color palette. A dark kitchen with large windows will be cozy and sophisticated, but lacking natural light, everything transitions to suffocating very quickly. This is also the most buyer-polarizing palette when selling a house. People who like it really love it, while people who do not find it heavy. If you plan to stay long-term and this is exactly the style you want, then go for it. But if you are selling in the near future, you should know that in advance. A dark kitchen is not for anyone who wants to play it safe. But when done right, it creates a type of feeling that white or neutral kitchens rarely can achieve. In the evening, turn on the warm lighting. The light reflects softly on the brass hardware. The dark color serves as a background for the texture to pop, and the kitchen becomes a place that makes people want to open a bottle of wine and sit back longer instead of just leaving right after cooking. 9 palettes, 9 different feelings. There is no single one that is right for everyone because it depends on the light in your kitchen, the way you live, and how you want to feel every time you walk into it. The simplest way is to take a few swatches, place them next to each other under the actual light, live with it for a few days, and then decide which palette makes you want to try it the most.